What's up, everybody? This is Chris at A Reader's Journey, and today I'm just going to be doing a bit of what I've been up to for the past month because I haven't made a video in a while for different reasons. And while I haven't actually, in the time since my last video, finished a fantasy book or a full novel of any kind, I have been reading a lot. I've been writing. I've been doing a lot for school. And I just had some life stuff that's going on. So my reading time has been pretty limited in terms of fantasy books. But I will talk about what I've been up to, what I have been reading, and some other stuff as well. So I think in my November video, my mid-month check-in or whatever, I had started The Prophet of Edan by Philip Chase. Boom, right here. And this is what I've been reading in my free time. I'm not super duper far into it, but I have made a lot of progress. I'm on page 228, chapter 10. And I'm having a great time with this book. Even though I am reading it really slowly, this just kind of happens when my semesters kick into full swing over the last few years as I'm going back to school. You know, my personal reading, it's for pure enjoyment, kind of falls aside a little bit, but I am really enjoying this. I love Philip Chase's writing. I'm having a great time as this big religious war of conquest is spreading throughout the land. Our main character's having a really terrible time of it, and basically they're getting their asses kicked left and right all over this continent. And I think a factor in why I'm reading it slowly is because it is a little bit more slow-paced. You know, sometimes like months will go by in between chapters. Not every chapter, you know, but there is a significant amount of time passing. It's not like this is all happening in a few days. You know, we have our main character, Raven from book 1. He's sort of in like a training sequence or series of chapters where he's trying to master what do they call it? Not the way, but the realm of origins, the songs of origins. Super cool magic system in this. It's really, I know I've talked about it before and people have probably heard about this, but Philip Chase's exploration or inclusion of magic in this story, his take on it is very spiritual. It's not a magic system per se, you know, you can't break it down into elements or anything, but it's internally consistent in the world, and it is really interesting in terms of how it's used by different characters and how different belief systems interpret it or even shape it. You know, like the bad guys don't think they're bad guys, they're just like a really powerful religion in this world who are really good at using this form of magic, and they think they are using it to spread the good word and get all of this land, the Ormanland, under the reign of their religion and their god, and they think it's, you know, everyone else who doesn't believe what they believe are heathens, heretics, and they basically, if you get in our way, you're going to be put to the sword, you're going to get pushed out of the way, you're going to die. So our main characters are all on the other side of this war, and so it's absolutely brutal. But it's really, I've been taken aback by how many setbacks and how much difficulty our main characters are facing. You know, 200 plus pages into the book, that's just one defeat after another. You know, we'll send out a small force to try to join the good fight, and they will face one setback after another and lose a lot of their soldiers. I've just been surprised at how intense this side of defeat or the losing side of a war has been so far. I don't think there's one chapter where the good guys win so far. So I'm taking my time with this. I'm loving it. Sometimes when I read a book slowly over time, I I feel like a deeper connection to the characters just because I'm taking my time with it. I'm not forcing myself. I'm kind of letting, and then certain authors, the language, I feel like just takes longer to absorb. I've heard this about Stephen Erickson, Jenny Words, which I want to read soon, their series. But yeah, just authors who take their time and have a more meticulous or deeper use of language than, say, I don't know, a Brandon Sanderson or any like page turning type of author. Some books I read really fast, really quickly, but yeah, for a lot of different reasons this is taking a long time, but I'm not letting that bother me. It has stopped me from making any booktube videos because, usually a booktube video is about what you've been reading, and I haven't actually technically finished the book through all of November and December so far, but I don't care because I do have stuff that I want to talk about and things that I have been reading separate from just novels, and I will get into that. But before I do, I guess I'll just talk about a little bit about the stuff that I have been doing. So I have been wrapping up my school semester. That's done for the fall. Finished out really well in all my classes, but I had to put all my focus into that and my time when I wasn't working or writing into making sure I get these last few projects done. If you don't care, don't watch this. I will talk more about reading like short stories and stuff in my fiction writing class and what I've been writing. But if you don't care, go ahead and click off, whatever. But yeah, I'm taking 3 classes, and some of it will relate back to booktube and reading and writing because I am trying to get a English degree with a concentration in creative writing. So it all relates to each other, but surprisingly, my expository writing class has been really interesting this year. I haven't really talked too much about it, but this is just one of those like absolute requirements in an English degree. I want to say, is it like introduction to literature is required and expository writing, or I forget what the 2 big ones are for an English degree. It might be like an introductory writing class, I forget. But anyway, expository writing, I didn't expect to enjoy this class, and even my first few weeks in the class I was a little unsure about it because some of the readings we were doing were really academic in nature and related to rhetoric and discourse, which was sort of vaguely interesting, but I have a hard time with academic writing. I think it's all usually super dry, really dense and hard to read. I would never read academic sort of writing for fun for the most part, but as the semester has progressed, my professor, I don't know if all expository writing classes are this way, but my professor let each student pick a discourse community to study over the course of the semester, which is basically any group of people to get together to communicate about a specific subject. And a lot of these terms were new to me. Never heard, I don't think, the term discourse community. And discourse is just like communication. So yeah, we studied rhetoric and then we pick a discourse community. And I was like, I'm getting back into booktube. Why don't I pick booktube as a discourse community to study? So I've included some of my favorite booktubers like in a few of my papers. I've even like referenced it in my works cited and within a paper. Some videos like in terms of analyzing how they use discourse or rhetoric in their videos, maybe not consciously, but how I perceive it's sort of occurring in their videos, how they're communicating with their audience. Rhetoric, like rhetorical analysis, is all about, I have learned, analyzing your purpose, your audience, and then designing your message, shaping your message for a specific outcome that you want, your purpose. So you have to know your audience, you have to understand what your purpose is, and anytime you go to communicate with anyone, really. And a lot of people aren't conscious of this. I think a lot of booktubers actually are, whether they put those specific words or terminology to it or concepts or not. But a lot of my favorite booktube channels, or the ones that I think are most effective, are the ones who have a clear purpose in mind for their specific video. They understand their audience and the expectations of their audience, their subscriber base, or just booktube people who watch booktube in general, and you can tell they clearly shape their message around achieving a specific purpose. Anyway, it's been really interesting to like see booktube through that lens while studying it this semester. So that's been really interesting. And then as the semester was coming to a close, our final project was to actually make a multimedia project of some kind. It's like, if you're a newcomer into this discourse community, here are the discourse genres and conventions that you might need to know. So I was like, I'll make a booktube video talking about how to join the booktube community. So I did. It's unlisted. I don't think I'll release it because, I mean, what the hell do I know? I've only made a few videos in general. So I really just made it for my class. But in the process, I made a lot of promises in my like rough draft and my outlining stages. I was like, I'm gonna learn how to use editing software, and I'm gonna learn how to put music in my videos. And because a lot of those like multimedia elements are sort of conventions of booktube videos in the booktube community, to add visual interest, to add sound, like, or to do an intro. So I actually kind of crash course learned a bunch of that. I downloaded DaVinci Resolve. I don't know if I'm gonna put any of that into this video, but like learning an editing program, finding out how to put royalty-free music in a video and how that works, and even I made a little intro and an outro. They're pretty rough mock-ups, but in the future going forward, I might play around with some of that in my videos. I know my lighting, my technical elements of my videos is still pretty rough, but I try not to let that get in the way. If I feel like making a video, I just make a video. I don't worry about the technical stuff. But anyway, I might start editing a bit more, throwing in some like lo-fi music in the background here and there. And then if I really like get in full swing with this booktube thing, and I'm enjoying that process, because I mean, that program, DaVinci Resolve, is pretty intuitive. I only watched one tutorial video, and it's flowed pretty naturally overall, the process, and I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed the technical part of layering, I don't know what you would call them, tracks or like video, audio, throwing in images into it, and text. It was really cool. So anyway, that's what I did for one class. And then another one was my studies in 19th century English, British literature, which I was talking about that. I read Great Expectations of Jane Eyre, read a bunch of adaptations of both, and for the final paper, you pick one of those books and a specific adaptation, and you write a paper about sort of all the like studies, adaptation studies, the scholarship on that we've read this semester, and kind of apply it to the adaptation choices that were made by the creators of those. So I picked Great Expectations by Dickens and Alfonso Cuarón's 1998 movie with Ethan Hawke and Gwyneth Paltrow, and I had a hard time with that paper for different reasons. I couldn't wrap my head around what I wanted to say, and my professor actually, after I sent my proposal, he sent me back some really good articles, and I basically wrote my paper based on those two articles. One was about how the choices and adaptation for that movie were or the adaptation of Great Expectations kind of was taking advantage of some postmodernism inherent in Dickens's work that kind of directly addressed Generation X, like the generation that came of age in the 80s and 90s, like generation of disillusionment, disenchantment, so there was a lot of like the era that Dickens wrote Great Expectations had some similarities. I think it was early capitalism and the disenchantment with, trying to rise through the social ladder that people had and those experiences back in the Victorian era. And then Generation X in the 90s, it was like basically the boomers fucked up the economy in the country, excuse my language, and Generation X had to deal with the consequences of that and grow up in a time with crazy like oversaturation of media and family structures that were evolving, basically the realities of their time. And it's a lot of it is in the movie, the adaptation. But anyway, and there were a few other articles that I used in that paper. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed Great Expectations reading it this time around. I had tried in middle school, hated it, but this time, I mentioned it previously, but I really like how Dickens is just roasting everybody. All of his main characters, his side characters, the society that he lived in. He's just like, I think most of what he wrote was satire, but he's really just like picking apart things in a fun, enjoyable way. And he is just making fun of everybody all the time for the most part, and like ridiculous like caricatures for a lot of his characters, but it works really well in terms of the story and relationships and like the themes that he's trying to get at, to address the problems in his society in an entertaining way. Anyway, I had a lot of fun with that book this year, and then I really loved Alfonso Cuarón's movie, which I guess got crapped on by critics and audiences at the time and was considered a failure even by the director. But I loved that adaptation. I think there were a ton of really intelligent choices that Cuarón, and I forget who his writer or co-writer was, but like the cinematography, I think Emmanuel Lubezki, I gotta double check that, but like the cinematography, the music choices, it was all really interesting and kind of helped me not only understand Dickens better, but Generation X, which is I've never like delved into. I've seen Fight Club, but I don't know what the hell the 90s was all about. I was a kid in the 90s, so I don't know what like growing up in the 80s and 90s was really like, as a young adult. But anyway, so, and that paper was really, I finished that. I had to get like the deadline extended to the absolute limit, but I finished it and got a good grade on it. So anyway, and then the last class that I'll talk to, which is maybe the most relevant here, I don't know, is it's like an introductory fiction writing class, form and technique of fiction. And I've been writing kind of in my free time for the last 10 plus years, trying to write a fantasy novel. I'm failing, but learning all the while and getting better. But I had never actually taken a writing class of any kind, not in high school, not of any kind, where, I watched a few like Neil Gaiman's masterclass, which, Neil Gaiman sucks right now, so I don't have to talk about that. But this is the first time I've ever really submitted my work to a professor or peers, like writing peers other than my brothers, for the most part. So this was a really great experience. My professor was awesome. He had a ton of really interesting choices as far as pieces that we read in terms of like short stories, because the class was kind of focused on short stories for the most part. And we had a textbook which was really great, but then also the professor incorporated a lot of pieces from Wonder Book by Jeff Vandermeer, which actually happened to, I bought this 10 years ago and I was like obsessed with it at the time. And I took a bunch of notes way back when and highlighted stuff and tried to use it in my writing, but then I just forgot about it for a long time, for years. And then to see the professor pull this out and use a ton of excerpts from it throughout this class, just like coming at every type of writing element or topic or subject from a different angle, is kind of what Wonder Book is all about. And I mean, it really incorporates a lot of elements of like inspiration, the creative process, and there's no right way to write a story. There are just different ways of approaching it, but getting inspired is huge. Like the creative drive is huge here. And I mean, this is not just Jeff Vandermeer. This is a ton of different writers and authors. Some you would recognize, like Orson Scott Card. I feel like even George R. Martin has a piece in here. Other people, but anyway, like this was an amazing textbook, and I went and dug around in my drawers or cabinets or whatever to find it, because I was like, oh yeah, I love that book. And so kind of exploring that again is amazing. So anyway, if you can find Wonder Book, the illustrated, I mean, it's got crazy cool illustrations too. That's another, like, I'll just show, like, it's got a ton of really off the wall art in here. I don't know if that's going to show up on the screen, but just a ton of really cool concepts, use of like photography and illustration, just to keep you inspired the whole time. So it was cool that I had this and I could pull it out and be like, oh yeah, that was amazing. Anyway, and then just throughout this semester, I did want to shout out what else I have been reading, because that's been taking up my time where I would be reading fantasy books. So I just wrote down some of my favorite short stories that we've been reading and studying elements of. I'll just run through those really fast. This Blessed House, and excuse my pronunciations here, I'm very uncultured, but I'll just run through some of these names. This Blessed House by Jhumpa Lahiri, I don't know if I'm saying that right, was a really, I think that might have been the first one we read this semester, but really cool use of like symbolism, character voice, point of view, characterization in a small amount of pages, but also like conflict within a newly married couple that maybe shouldn't have gotten married, and how that they had just like bought a house together and there was a lot of tension between their two personality types there, which is really cool. Unamuno's Boxes by Agustina Basterica. Fascinating, super strong character voice. I had never read this author, but that was amazing. The Werewolf by Angela Carter. A page or two, maybe? I don't know, I read it on a website, so it was hard to tell the page count, but super short, but like very strong sense of atmosphere and setting immediately. There's an interesting, it was sort of like a fairy tale, medieval, like, but it was like that was a setting, but it was like a take on Little Red Riding Hood, sort of, but it was very interesting. It packed a lot of like cultural vibes into a short amount of time to where you believe there was a werewolf, like, and how the people of this like small mountain community village in Europe, I'm assuming, it was a while ago I read it, but how they reacted and how the story was told was very matter of fact. Like, this little girl got attacked and then like the whole town came and stoned this old woman who actually turned out to be a werewolf to death, and it was like, oh yeah, that just happened. The Era, and this pronunciation is gonna be rough. The Era by Nana Kwame Adjei Brenya, which personally I hated the early reading experience of this short story because the voice is so annoying, but it's intentional. and it's like in maybe a few hundred years in the future, like society has evolved in ways that have dumbed down the populace even more, and like there's an aversion to sentimentality and emotion, and like it's got a little bit of that Brave New World 1984. It's definitely dystopian, but it's like a high schooler point of view, and you know, people are shamed for showing emotion or having real friends or real feelings, or about even, they just say the first thing that pops into their head with no consideration of how it might affect other people. So I think a real lack of empathy, and like the character voice, the voice that it was written in was so annoying. But as I read more and more of it, I'm like, oh, this is about kids growing up right now on TikTok and YouTube. Like, I see it. You see it online, you see it in people in your life. Like, this is the way. There's so much of a lack of empathy or even integrity in not the younger generation, but the way people are growing up, I think, when they grow up in this certain type of media environment where there's a real, like, gross lack of empathy. And it's not kids' fault, obviously. It's like the way, I don't want to get too deep into it, but a ton of factors into why that is happening. But I mean, like, a lack of literacy, and I think a lack of empathy for other people was the most significant, my big takeaway from it. But I was like, I hate this character, but I understand what the author is doing here. So that was cool. Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff, which was a little bit older, but like, this was fascinating, and I guess he's a really celebrated short story writer. I mean, it's like a literary critic who is in a bank, and the bank gets robbed, and this guy can't shut his mouth, and he's like critiquing the bank robbers, making fun of them as they're pointing a gun, and they shoot him in the head, and he dies. Spoiler, I mean, that's the title of the story, but that was like the beginning, or sort of the midpoint of the story. And then it was like what flashes through this guy's head as he's dying, and that took like the second half of the story, but it was fascinating. So many different uses of the things we were studying, all like, you know, how to use exposition, interiority, characterization. It was all happening all at the same time, like as the story was coming to a crescendo. Like our point of view character was dead or like dying, but it was going back to like what he didn't see in this moment, were all of these like significant emotional moments from his life. This is what he doesn't think of while he's dying, what he actually thinks of while he's dying, or what flashes through his neurons. And then it just gets to like to the heart of who this character is, which is about, I mean, essentially a love of language and how he discovered his love of language. Anyway, fascinating. And then I mentioned before Darkness Box by Ursula K. Le Guin. I talked about that, but it's so cool. I had only read A Wizard of Earthsea by Le Guin prior to this, earlier this year. But this short story was so just intriguing, the way it played with like the reader's experience and the rules of the world of a fantasy world. But it was not a fantasy world, it was really just like this sort of dreamlike reality where the world had no consequences until somebody opened a box of darkness that was gifted to them, and then time and mortality like were kickstarted in this world, and it like changed the behavior of the characters right away. But it wasn't really about the characters, it was about the reader's experience, and I talked about in the prior video. So anyway, there were a few more, but those were my like the standouts for the year for me. And I think my professor sort of designed this course. Some of it was from the textbook, which I forget what it was called, but like it was a required textbook that they had to use for this course. But then the professor used a lot of their own incorporated material that they thought was really interesting, which was, I think, the majority of what I just talked about. Was awesome. So normally I don't read short stories for the most part, and I'm not usually interested in writing them, But this definitely gave me a lot more appreciation for the art form as a way to learn the techniques of writing, but also just to like read a really interesting story. Oh, I forgot. There's another one. I mentioned it somewhere before, but what of this goldfish do you wish? Or would you wish? I forget who the author is. Go read that short story. Fuck, it's bonkers. That might be my favorite, but I forgot to talk about it. Yeah, but that's enough about that. And then, we're doing writing exercises and assignments throughout the semester, which were really fun. And I kind of chose there's like a goblin janitor at a magic school that I've wanted to write about for a long time. He's basically like the Argus Filch from Harry Potter, but he's like a goblin. Anyway, so I used like him for a lot of different assignments throughout the semester, which was really fun. Explore different like how to incorporate more conflict and tension in the short story very early on. Did some characterization exercises with him, which was really cool. And then like for one of the workshops, I used a piece about him and got some feedback on that, which was really cool. Got like I try to incorporate humor with this character, and I've talked about that I think before, but like trying to incorporate humor into my writing in the last few years has been really rewarding and keeps writing fun for me. I read Mort by Terry Pratchett last year, and that was kind of like woke something up in me. And then a few years ago I wrote a short story actually about Filch and Harry Potter for a different class at community college, but I was like, trying to like incorporate humor and whimsicality into not only characters and their interactions, but some elements of the world building, to not take everything too seriously. It makes writing fun. So what I'm writing now is taking a lot of that into account. And I had just started writing this story, bouncing ideas back and forth with my brother, like in my free time that I had this semester. And then our second workshop came around, and I was like, what I've written is the perfect word count. And I think I've been like subconsciously incorporating a lot of these techniques into this project so far. So I just submitted that for the workshop, and I got a lot of good feedback on that. It was really cool. I also read amazing pieces by my fellow students, my workshop peers. I got really lucky with the people that were in my groups. Not only were they amazing writers and young, I'm 33 and I'm going to college, but they're like, 19, 20, early 20s, and their writing is amazing. I was super impressed. Everybody whose work I read was really, really good this semester. But it was really cool to get direct feedback from peers and from a professor who, has studied and written a lot more than I have, for the first time, really. So it's a really fulfilling experience. It was only an introductory writing class, so I'm going to take more in the spring and next fall. Take Fiction 1 and Fiction 2. Anyway, if you're interested in writing at all, and I guess reading short stories, maybe this, or going to school, I don't know. I've had a really great experience with going to university this time around. I tried when I was 19 or 20, and I tried to go for environmental science, but like I had no idea. I didn't have enough self-knowledge to know that I hate doing science and I'm not good at it. Math and science, statistics, I can't stand practicing it. And I didn't get good grades in high school in my math and science classes, as compared to all my other, humanities classes. I should have known, but what do you know when you're 18? Anyway, so going back to school has been a very fulfilling experience for me so far. Doing things that I'm naturally interested in and have a propensity for, or an interest in, really. So anyway, that's what's been going on with school, and that's read a lot of really cool short stories. I talked about my writing a little bit. I'm doing that for fun. I don't know. I'm like 3 or 4 chapters into it. It's a fantasy story. I imagine it as a novel or a series of novels. And my brother, we've started writing it together. Usually I just bounce ideas back and forth, but I was like, we should just write this together. Like, we found like a voice that works for the world and the characters. He had some idea for some of the characters in this like found family group, whatever, that's coming together. I was like, just like, this is awesome. This is super fun to kind of let go from, I have to write everything. It has to be my world, my ideas. And I was like, it's better to, like, everything when you incorporate the ideas or feedback from others or influence from people who have a lot of the same inspirations as you. You know, this doesn't always work, I guess, co-writing, but I'm having so much fun doing it, and we're discovery writing it for the most part. So that's so much fun. I look forward to. I try to, like, every night I have a free night, because I tend to write at night lately, or in the evening. Like, try to write a scene, just one scene, or even write the beginning of the next scene, or like wrap up the scene that I was writing previously. But just, I mean, I'm not forcing myself to do it. I'm doing it when I have free time, and I'm writing with, you know, someone else who's I've never done before, and it's really fun. And discovery writing is awesome. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to outline anything again, because it just ruins the fun of it for me. As much as you can keep the process fun and enjoyable, at least in my experience, do that. Whatever works for you, keep it fun. And for me, like, discovery writing, we have loose ideas for where the story is going, character backstories and all that, but I really don't know exactly what's going to happen next, or where the story is going long term, and that's exciting. So anyway, and then I did want to mention, the other thing I read recently was Chance Dillon is another YouTuber who is writing, and he's I think he plans on self-publishing his his debut fantasy novel next year, and he's been documenting his writing journey on YouTube. And you know, I read a sample of it. I think he had a link to it, which was awesome. So I've been talking to him back and forth, and he sent me like the first 40 pages of his book, which is still in development. I think he just sent it off to a developmental editor. But I mean, just following along with somebody's writing journey is so cool, and he's so obviously passionate about the world and his characters and what he's working on right now, that it's you know, it's inspiring. And I'm like, well, maybe I've always thought traditional publishing was the way to go, but like, a lot of the people I follow on BookTuber are writers. If self-publishing feels right for the type of story that you're doing, that can be even more fulfilling in terms of like writing exactly what you want to write, getting it out in the way that you want to get it out. So I've just been thinking about that a little bit, you know, for the future, because I do want to publish. I do want to write and publish a book one day. That's, you know, been a lifelong dream for me. So, but yeah, his Chance Dillon, Mercy, Tears of the Fallen. I think Tears of the Fallen is the name of the first book, and I think Mercy is the name of the world, or the name of the series. But yeah, I read the first 40 pages of that within the last week or so, and it's awesome. Really cool, brutal fantasy world, but there's a ton of really like fascinating world building. And you know, I haven't read Malazan yet. I think that is kind of a big influence for him, as well as D&D and a lot of other things, Berserk. But so it does kind of like, there's a heavy like amount of world building up front. At least that's my interpretation of it, that I was like, well, there's a lot coming at me in the first few pages, but like, as those, it's all like prologue sort of related, the first few sections, but you know, as you get more information and context, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is all clicking. I understand what's going on here for the most part. You know, some is intentionally mysterious, but huge, epic, really cool fantasy world building and events that have happened in recent history. There was a big war type of event that happened. I don't want to spoil anything, but just like I'm as interested in what just happened in this world as I am about like the story going forward, which is kind of a weird place to start from, but like I enjoy that balance between like fascinating past versus events in the present or the future. Like, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire does that, or Harry Potter, where you want to know about the past generation and its influence on the present, you know, with, you know, Ned and anyway, that's a whole different subject. But like you can tell Chance really has a handle on the world. I feel like he might even like played a D&D campaign in this world, I forget, or DM'd it. But you know, you can tell he's living in it, and it shows on the page. And it's really, I mean, it hits hard. Like there's some brutal stuff going on. I don't like the word grimdark, but I mean some elements of it could possibly be interpreted as grimdark, just in terms of the brutality on display. But you know what? People are brutal in the present, but especially, you know, in the past, when people just killed each other with swords. Like that's awful. But anyway, so that was really cool. I think he's gonna do a cover reveal in January. Like he's getting his stuff, he's getting feedback from a professional developmental editor, and he's just like really hitting the ground running on his project and his writing. So it's really inspiring to see. But anyway, go follow Chance Dillon if you haven't already. I think he has a video of himself reading some of the prologue. And again, I should mention this is all pre sending off to an editor work. So, you know, his work is gonna keep evolving as he gets more, you know, editing feedback on it. But I think it's awesome. I think it's amazing. I can't wait to read more of his story and find out more about the world. This is probably a long enough video for me. I don't know when I'll make another one. My semester's over, so I will get back to reading the Prophet of Edan more heavily soon. But I'm not forcing myself to. It's like, it's a slow pace read for me, and I'm fine with that. But I did actually buy the first Malazan book, Gardens of the Moon, recently. I've gotten obsessed again with Philip Chase's channel, and been watching a lot of his like Dear Dr. Fantasy series, and some of the early videos from a few years ago. Everybody is so enthusiastic and obsessed and passionate about the Malazan series, especially like Philip and Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network, and there's this whole Malazan community online. And I kind of like, when I watched some of that at the time, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, but whatever. But like just hearing about it again, like I want to know more about that reading experience because people speak of it so highly. So I just ordered, you know, mass market paperback version of it, but I do want to read Gardens of the Moon soon. I've been low on funds, so I haven't bought some of the other books that I keep mentioning that I want to read. You know, I want to read Royal Assassin, Wall of Storms. I mention that in every video, but I'm just kind of like, I just started a new job after not having a job for like 2 months, and so like I'm waiting until I feel a little bit more comfortable financially to start buying books again. And yeah, so I really want to continue Realm of the Elderlings. I loved Assassin's Apprentice. Ken Liu is a genius, so I want to continue the Dandelion Dynasty. And I, you know, hear nothing but good things about this series. So, I mean, I don't know. I've read maybe 10 to 15, definitely more than 10 books this year. But I do want to make like a end of the year wrap up video, favorite books of the year, something like that. We'll see how that goes, because if I feel like writing, I'm gonna write. If I feel like reading, I'm gonna read. If I feel like making a booktube video and talking about stuff, I'll do that. But it's not a super regular thing for me right now. But anyway, I'm gonna stop talking. So yeah, that's what I've been reading and writing and doing for school. If you've followed along with all of this, thank you for watching. I'm not sure if any of this is interesting to anyone else, but I'm having a good time, and just like I've had so much building up in the back of my head that I want to talk about at some point. I tried to film my Talents trilogy video. That did not go well for a bunch of different reasons, so I kind of gave up on that. So that's, I'm probably not going to make that because it's been a little bit too long since I read book 2 of that. But anyway, I don't know how to wrap this up. If you've gotten this far, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these short stories. If you have any cool experiences with school, with reading, with writing, anything you've got going on. If like, are there more stories or novels by these authors that I've mentioned so far? Yeah, just let me know any thoughts or comments anyone has on anything I've talked about. Let me know, because when I do make time to make videos, like talking with other people about what I'm, throwing out there at BookTube is really rewarding. So let me know. And yeah, thank you for following along with my reading journey. Let me know how yours is going, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.